I am so excited to present day 4 of my epic adventure to Washington, D.C. This is the final day of our walking tour and just as exciting, thrilling, and outstanding as days 1, 2, and 3. Not only would this day be one of fulfilling the famous workarounds, like returning to the old post office tower, Supreme Court, and Ford's Theater, the best thing that could have happened occurred today. I got inside the U.S. Capitol. I've spilled the beans again. You are going to love today's adventure as we utilize the metro to see the central part and eastern end of the National Mall, capturing phenomenal photos on this, the brightest and sunniest day of our 4-day visit to this, our glorious nation's capital. Grab a seat, grab your favorite beverage, and a snack as you travel across America with me. This video is filled with lots of great tips mixed with history, architecture, and the National Mall. For those of you wondering about my National Archives sunglasses, I have an update. It is at the end of this video. Armchair travelers and trucker friends, this will be almost as good as being there. Just like the previous 2 days, we caught the Metro Green Line from Branch Avenue Station to reach L'Enfant Plaza. I'm going to have to do a video on Pierre L'Enfant one day. Unless you are lodging in D.C., which would be ultimate but costly, I highly recommend taking the rail into the city from one of the Maryland or Virginia suburbs. It's cost-effective, timely, convenient, and all-around fun. Riding the train and the challenge of deciding where and when is part of the thrill of an urban adventure. Once at L'Enfant Plaza, we boarded the train to Federal Triangle Station, located under the post office building, across from the old post office tower. We needed the orange to Vienna, blue to Franconia, or silver to Ashburn. I'll remind you later how to know which train to board. I knew that the Ford Theater opened at 9 a.m., and we had 45 minutes to get a few things accomplished beforehand. I thought I had missed getting a park pass stamp at the White House Visitor Center, so I needed to walk down there. On the way, we mailed our postcards that we had purchased the previous 3 days. Remember, a postcard is one of the least expensive souvenirs and a great memory hook. I do want to point out the District of Columbia government building. The city wants to become the 51st state. Now, we returned the direction we came from the train to reach 10th Street. I saw this interesting parking garage entrance. There are plenty of parking garages for those of you choosing to drive into the city. We came alongside a park ranger that worked at Ford's Theater. He had worked there 12 years and loved being on staff at this National Park unit. Ford's Theater and the Peterson House that I presented in day 3 are located across from each other. The National Park Service works hard to meticulously preserve these historic sites as they appeared at the time of the world-changing events. The building to the south of the Peterson House with a photo of Lincoln in the window is the location of the Aftermath exhibits and the incredible book tower. Now it's 9 o'clock on the nose and we went to the ticket booth to get the required free tickets. To enter the theater, you must pass through the museum. There was a huge group flooding into the museum, and we made a beeline to the staircase that leads to the theater. It said closed. We quickly asked the ranger stationed in the museum what was going on, to which he answered that the theater didn't open until 9:30. It's 9:30. Let's go. I mentioned in day 3 the drawings on the walls leading to the theater had times and records of the day's events for Booth and Lincoln. I briskly walked by them because I wanted to be first to the box. But since this isn't live, I want to take a minute to read a few of them to you. 8 a.m. Lincoln breakfast with his family. 9 a.m. in his room at the National Hotel, John Wilkes Booth rises and dresses. 12 and a half hours later, at 8:30 p.m., the Lincolns arrive at Ford's Theater. The production stops and the orchestra plays Hail to the Chief. Lincoln loved going to the theater. He had attended Ford's Theater at least 9 times during his presidency to relax during the Civil War. 10 p.m., Booth enters the lobby of Ford's Theater and heads up the stairs to the dress circle. He hands his card to the Lincoln footman and enters the back of the President's Theater box. 10 p.m., Lincoln and Mary hold hands. Mary wonders what young Clara will think, and the president replies, "She won't think anything about it." These are the last words Lincoln spoke. Mic drop. We turned the corner, jaunting up the flight of stairs to enter Ford's Theater. Breathe. I darted straight for the box where Lincoln was shot. Glass prevents visitors from direct access and also from taking really good photos. But here it is, the place where President Lincoln's life ended, for all practical purposes. John Wilkes Booth had paused here outside the state box. He wedged the outer door shut with a wooden bar. When the audience roared with laughter, Booth entered the box, gun in hand. Booth shot Lincoln in the back of the head from less than 2 feet away. Mary Todd Lincoln screamed. Booth then stabbed Henry Rathbone in the arm and leaped onto the stage. He shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," to the shocked audience and dashed out of the back door. I have seen the actual chair Lincoln was seated in at the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan. If you've never been to the Henry Ford in Michigan, you are totally missing out, and that place needs to be on everyone's bucket list. When Booth leapt from the box, he got entangled in the decorations of the presidential box and landed off balance on the stage, breaking a bone in his left leg. He moved across the stage to exit the back door, where he mounted a horse in the alley to briskly escape the city. The unconscious president was carried across the street. Watch my Day 3 video for details about that dreadful night and grief-filled morning at the Peterson house. As you can see, Ford's Theater is still a working theater, an inconvenient reality we had learned on Day 3, and why we had to make this Day 4 workaround. Over 1,500 people were at Ford's Theater on April 14th. Most saw John Wilkes Booth escape after shooting President Lincoln. Everyone there agreed that Booth jumped from Lincoln's box onto the stage. As you can see in the photos, the box seats were just on the side of the stage. This was interesting to me. The bullet entered the left back side of Abraham Lincoln's head, about an inch to the left of the medial line of the skull and at the level of his ear. The president never regained consciousness. The closest hospital at the time was the Armory Square Hospital. This facility stood on the south side of the National Mall, near where the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum is now located. On Day 2 of this epic adventure, I took you to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. The distance from Ford's Theater was just over 1/2 of a mile. But sad to say, hospitals were not very sanitary in those days and basically a place to go to die. I was curious about the bullet that dropped in that porcelain dish at the time of the autopsy at the White House. I told you about that in Day 3. I found out that the original .44 caliber bullet is on public display at the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Silver Springs, Maryland. It is displayed alongside some of Lincoln's skull fragments, as well as the probe doctors used to search the wound for the bullet. My bucket list just gets bigger by the week. In conclusion on this part of our adventure, John Wilkes Booth was on the run for 12 days after assassinating President Lincoln. Soldiers of the 16th New York Cavalry were tasked with tracking down Booth and his accomplice David Harold after they had escaped Washington. Booth had maintained a diary, which is one of the many artifacts used by historians to piece together this conspiracy and murder. So much more about Booth and the Peterson house is in my Day 3 video. I hope you watch this complete series and share with a friend. I do have a warning. At one point in this video, your tour guide, she loses it. Now let's walk on southwesterly to reach the old post office tower. I took you there in the wind and rain on Day 2, and the weather was beautiful earlier, but now it was getting a little overcast. What's going on? This memorial and statue of Benjamin Franklin, who is known as a true polymath, poses in front of the 5-star hotel. If you were wondering why the engraving on their base reads printer, that is because the person who gifted the statue was the founder of the Washington Post. I really wanted to go up on the observation deck again to see a little more than we did during our previous visit. Here are some clearer photos from this terrific hidden gem. The old post office tower is the 3rd tallest structure in the city and affords terrific views and is a way lesser known property, even though it is located in the Pennsylvania National Historic District on Pennsylvania Avenue, right between the U.S. Capitol and the White House. I highly recommend this free, amazing gem of a stop, not only for historicity's sake, but the views. We are going to the Capitol today, I hope. Big surprise for you and me coming soon. We crossed the street to re-enter Federal Triangle Station, reached under the William Jefferson Clinton Federal Building. We would take the orange, blue, or silver line just to the very next stop, Smithsonian Station. Of course, we could have just walked the 3 or 4 blocks, but this was our 4th hit-the-ground-running day. We had lots to do, workarounds to solve, and frankly, I love the train. We got off immediately, taking the escalator up to the street level. I made this stop because I wanted to take photographs of the Smithsonian Castle. Completed in 1855, the castle is the Smithsonian Institution signature building. The castle closed Wednesday, February 1st, 2023 for its first major renovation in more than 50 years. We stepped across to see the Professor Joseph Henry statue and photograph the castle, even though construction activity blocked the street across the front. Professor Henry was a scientist and the first president of the Smithsonian Institution. The statue was dedicated in 1883, a few years after his death. Now the weather cleared and we were so close to the Washington Monument and the World War II Memorial Visitor Station, I decided we would walk that way. I stalled a moment and thought, this was my last day here. I was so happy, but sad at the same time. This was almost over. Do you have that feeling when you want to drag something out because you don't want it to end? The sky was perfect for these photos of the Washington Monument. We had a rainy visit to the top in my day 2 video, but I think it was incredible in spite of the weather. I see that Twilight Talks are held at the Sylvan Theater on the Washington Monument grounds. That sounds like a worthwhile thing to attend. Friday, we would be 225 miles away and unable to attend. Another time, I couldn't help but jump on stage. There were restrooms behind the stage, and I'm taking advantage. I spotted him in the middle of the road, right where I had seen him on the park map. I had wanted to see the John Paul Jones Memorial on day 1, but didn't, so now was my chance. This was a workaround that I didn't expect to be able to catch. You are no doubt familiar with his famous statement, "I have not yet begun to fight." This is the guy. Jones was the first American Revolutionary Naval War hero. Seeing the Jefferson Memorial in the background made me even more nostalgic. That was day 1 of this epic adventure. Wow. Have you seen a lot or what? What has been your favorite video in this series, and what place stood out to you the most? I popped over to the World War II Memorial Information booth to get some more Park Passport book stamps I had missed, or at least wasn't sure I had. I had made a list. And by the way, I never got that Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial Park stamp. Reason 912 to go back to D.C. I heard the clippity-clop of horse hooves. There they were, the U.S. Park Police, passing behind me. This was awesome! Jones and the horses? I never expected this. Trending north across the National Mall, we passed through the World War II Memorial once again. This memorial is one of the most gorgeous I have ever seen anywhere. It is so compelling and grand, a fitting honor for all of those that served and lost their lives in World War II. I thought of Normandy and began to weep. One last photo for the day of the iconic Washington Monument. Do you really believe that? And a last photo of the Carp Pond in Constitution Gardens, where the signers of the Declaration of Independence Memorial is located. See day 1 for more on the 56 signers. I was wanting to get into the lawkeeper's house that we saw on day 1. You might recall it would be open on Thursday. Now, time was precious, and we had the 2 major sites, the U.S. Capitol and the Supreme Court, on the east end of the National Mall to get into, and we were getting hungry. We didn't carry anything into the city this day because we could not take water or food into the Supreme Court, as we had learned on day 2. As we approached the lawkeeper's house, the door was still locked, and the sign read, "Open at 11 a.m. I had missed that part. I looked at the time on the phone. 10:50. I just shook my head and thought, never mind. There's so much to learn and know about when visiting the National Mall. I hope this series has been a help to those of you planning a visit to the U.S. Capitol. And for you, my armchair travelers, I hope you're having a good time as you hang out with me on this adventure. Need to refill your drink or get another snack? We've got a lot to do. We're going to pause here and get a Polish dog, but from a different vendor. It wasn't nearly as delicious as the one we had on day 1. Can a hot dog be delicious? I recommend the Most North vendor for a Polish dog. We crossed into the Ellipse and spoke to a few of the National Guard members. You know, I couldn't help but take a selfie. We quickly crossed in front of the White House. Then, another brief snapshot of where the National Christmas tree is placed. And, of course, the Washington Monument is always in the scene, it seems. William Tecumseh Sherman. Oh, this is all a flashback of day 1. The Department of the Treasury, Department of Commerce, and passing alongside the Ronald Reagan Building to drop into the Federal Triangle Station once again. Have you taken a second to subscribe? If you aren't a subscriber and are enjoying this video and the series, please subscribe. This time, a blue, orange, or silver train ride would take us all the way to the Capitol South Station. I will repeat my travel hack regarding knowing which train you need. Always identify the train by the terminus of the line. We needed to travel east, so we needed the orange line to New Carrollton or the blue or silver line to Largo. Within minutes, we were riding the escalator to the ground level just a few blocks south of the U.S. Capitol. The U.S. Capitol is the building that houses the U.S. Congress, made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Congress has been housed here since 1800. We were going to see if we could get to the gift shop. We had not obtained timed entry tickets online ahead of time. A hard lesson I learned too late. Travel hack: when planning a trip to D.C., be sure to obtain timed entry tickets online ahead of time. Same-day tickets are sometimes available, and there is no guarantee they will be obtained at any of the major landmarks and museums. The 2 places that I missed getting early tickets for was the Washington Monument and the U.S. Capitol. I had wanted to get inside the White House, but those entries require contacting a member of Congress and a security clearance. We had not investigated that in enough time at all. We were fortunate to secure same-day tickets on day 2 for the Washington Monument, as you saw. And now we were treading the streets uphill to the U.S. Capitol with no expectations at all. On day 2, the lines to enter the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center were really long, and now we followed the path on the south side of the east front of the U.S. Capitol. The U.S. Capitol is one of the icons of world architecture, and President George Washington laid the cornerstone on September 18th, 1793. It had been damaged greatly by British troops during the War of 1812 and subsequently restored. The Capitol was enlarged and the present cast-iron dome built in the 1850s and 1860s. I will be telling you bits and pieces about the Statue of Freedom as we go inside and around the other side of the Capitol grounds. But the Statue of Freedom is the classical figure wearing a helmet with an eagle head and feathers and holds a sheathed sword, shield, and a victory wreath. The statue had been restored in 1993. The House pediment, the center pediment, and the Senate pediment are worth taking a few minutes to appreciate. Today, we were near the front of the line. Those tour buses can definitely make a difference. There weren't any right now. Be sure to understand what is and isn't allowed in each building you plan to visit. After passing through exceedingly high security, more intense than airport security, we entered the Grand Visitor Center. This visitor center was completed in 2008 and is located under the East Plaza. Immediately, one of the hosts approached us to ask if we had reservations, to which I sadly replied that we did not. He said, "Would you like to take the Capitol tour?" Fighting back tears of joy, I immediately responded, "Yes, sir!" Now, I do want to make a note. I think we only had this opportunity because we were not visiting during peak season. So do not expect that you're going to be able to just walk in like we did. Always plan ahead. Get tickets online well ahead of time. And another travel hack, if you want to get into the Senate or House galleries as a visitor, passes must be obtained from your senator or representative's office. Remember, I found that pass on the ground on day 2? That girl lost her really cool souvenir. Also, there is a tunnel from the U.S. Capitol to the Library of Congress. A don't miss stop for sure. But remember those timed entry tickets. See day 2 when we entered and toured the unbelievable and unforgettable Library of Congress. The host pointed to the large information desk below the railing and said we could go there and see if we could catch a tour. We darted down the stairs to the desk. I quickly blurted out asking if we could get on a tour even though we did not have reservations. The gentleman calmly asked if we would like to get on the tour that started in 10 minutes. I could have hit the floor. Absolutely. Would I actually be able to see one of the statues in Statuary Hall that I had been hoping to see for over a decade? He gave us our Capitol tour pass and told us to proceed to the line across the hall. I can't tell you how excited I was. The Capitol Visitor Center is our gateway to American art, architectural achievements, and where history has been and is being made. Once our position in line was secure, Steve stayed there. I did venture around to take photographs of some of the 14 statues that are placed in Emancipation Hall. If I mention or show either of your home state statues at any time during my tour inside the Capitol, drop me a comment and give your state a shout out. Helen Keller, Alabama. Wow, Keller was the first blind and deaf person to graduate from college. And then there's Sacagawea. She's one of my favorites. I've seen the original of this statue in Bismarck, North Dakota, on the state capitol grounds. Does that surprise you? I am a huge Lewis and Clark fan. The replica in the U.S. Capitol was placed there to commemorate the bicentennial of the 1805 Lewis and Clark expedition. Frederick Douglass represents Washington, D.C. His home is not too far, and I had every intention of going there, but that is on the list for next time. I have been to his grave in Rochester, New York. Does that surprise you? Eusebio Francisco Kino. I've mentioned Padre Kino in many of my videos about historic sites in Arizona. He was one of the statues I have always wanted to see. Johnny Cash represents Arkansas. This is one of the newest statues. Now there she is. Freedom. Look at this girl. The original plaster model for the bronze statue of Freedom is the focal point at the west end of Emancipation Hall, in front of the entrance to the exhibition hall. Wait until I take you in there. Visitors will enjoy this surprisingly up-close view of the model that towers 19.5 feet high and weighs approximately 13,000 pounds. She just doesn't really fit in, but here she is. You may remember seeing her at the inauguration back in January of 2025. I'll be sharing more about freedom when we peruse the Capitol grounds after our tour of the Supreme Court. The line began to move. We were being directed into the South Orientation Theater. The 13-minute film, Out of Many One, was very basic, and afterwards we filed out of the theater and were directed to one of the 5 lines. It was there we were given headsets, over which our specific tour guide would be speaking to those of us in their group. When I put my headset on, I knocked my sunglasses to the floor and the lens popped out and the frame around the lens was cracked. Yikes! I didn't really care. That didn't matter. I was inside the Capitol. I was going on a tour. This structure has undergone many changes over the decades and last 2 centuries, and I will take you along to the places our guide took us. I truly hope that you will take this tour one day. I want to take it again. The tour went at a fast clip, and I was pretty distracted by all that I was seeing and needing to take pictures of for you. I was that person, the one at the end of the line that didn't always keep up. As we passed through the hallways and by doorways, I was distracted at every turn. There were a couple of times that photographs were not allowed. The first major room we went into was the old Supreme Court chamber, which was utilized between 1810 and 1860. This is the room where the famous Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall presided in for 20 of his 34 years. We'll learn a little more about him when we get into the Supreme Court. In just a few minutes, I promise. Historians and law students will be familiar with the cases decided in this room, but everyone should be familiar with the Dred Scott decision. We have been to the courthouse where the lower court cases for Dred Scott were presented in St. Louis, Missouri. You're not surprised, are you? I tried to snap photos of everything. I did what I could, and the lighting is not the greatest here. We were on the move, and some of my pictures are on the move, too. A little too blurry for me to even share. What hath God wrought? Samuel F.B. Morse. On May 24, 1844, in the old Supreme Court room, now the Law Library in the Capitol, Morse sent the above message to Baltimore, Maryland, by the first electromagnetic telegraph instrument. That's incredible! By the way, wrought means fashioned in this context. We also went into the old Senate chamber. The United States Senate met in this chamber from 1810 until 1859, an era known as the Senate's Golden Age. Here were heard some of the most eloquent and passionate speeches in the nation's history. Senators such as Daniel Webster of Massachusetts. Wait a minute, I think New Hampshire claims Daniel Webster most of the time. Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina met in dramatic confrontation as tensions between the North and South escalated. The Missouri Compromise, the Webster-Hayne debate, and the Compromise of 1850 were all debated in this chamber. Simply incredible. Historians, are you weeping yet? Modeled after ancient amphitheaters, the room reflects the efforts of architects Benjamin Henry Latrobe and Charles Bulfinch. Remember Bulfinch? Remember his gatehouse that we saw on day one? We'll probably see his name again. Original works of art include the portrait of George Washington by Rembrandt Peale, the carved gilded eagle and shield, and the smaller curved desk on the dais used by the vice president. I'm almost breathless. I had always heard of Statuary Hall, and that was where I was wanting to go. But I learned that the statues donated from the individual states were literally everywhere. As we saw in Exhibition Hall, there were 14 down there. By 1850, so many new states had been admitted to the Union that the House and Senate had outgrown their chambers. It was decided to enlarge the Capitol by adding grand wings to the ends of the original building. In 1851, Daniel Webster, who we just mentioned, who had served in both houses of Congress, delivered one of his famous orations at the ceremony to lay the cornerstone for the new wings. The House occupied its current chamber in 1857, and the Senate moved into its chamber in 1859. I wish we could have gotten in those another day. The old hall of the House was later dedicated as National Statuary Hall. Congress invited each state to contribute 2 statues of its most notable citizens. Today, these statues are displayed in the National Statuary Hall, the Rotunda, the Capitol Visitor Center, and in corridors throughout the building. And we'll find out that they are also under the Rotunda at the crypt. Let's see who's in here. The crypt is the space beneath the rotunda. Because of its resemblance to similar areas in churches and chapels used for tombs, that's why it is called the crypt. The sandstone columns in the Doric style were installed in the 1820s under architect Charles Bulfinch, who completed the construction of the Capitol in 1826. Remember, I told you I'd mention him again really soon. The central white marble compass stone in the center floor marks the center of the Capitol and is the point where the city is divided into quadrants: northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest. And I have told you in a previous video that all streets and everything is directionally oriented from the U.S. Capitol. Our guide told us that it was understood that George Washington would be buried here in the center of this room. Since the president was buried at Mount Vernon already, it was determined that he would not be reinterred to this crypt. Also in the crypt is a gold case and replica of the Magna Carta, presented as a bicentennial gift to the Congress of the United States from the Parliament of the United Kingdom. The earliest extant of the Magna Carta was atop this gold case, and it was on display for 1 year before being returned to England. To see one of the original Magna Cartas, see my Day 2 video when we went to the National Archives, one of the most wonderful places in Washington, D.C. This has been some of the most captivating 4 days of my life. Now, the Rotunda. We are inside of the Capitol dome that we see on the exterior. In ways, these are like two different things, yet they are one piece of architecture, inspiring different emotions from the inside and from the out. The Rotunda connects the Senate and House of Representatives wings. The Rotunda is the heart and center of the Capitol. Although it sees no legislative function, it is a ceremonial space where state funerals have been held since the time of Abraham Lincoln for presidents, members of Congress, military heroes, and eminent citizens. Visiting heads of state and special guests are often received in the Rotunda, and many historic events have been celebrated there. Just stare at the center and imagine the history that has happened right there, just right there. Hanging in the Rotunda are 4 giant canvases painted by John Trumbull, an aide-de-camp to George Washington. He painted these scenes of the American Revolution. Paintings by 4 other artists depict events associated with exploration and settlement of the United States. Can you feel the history and the importance of this building, of this room? I felt overwhelmed. Can you name 3 people that have laid in state in this magnificent rotunda? Back to these paintings. The frames are set into the curved stone walls of the rotunda, but hold flat canvas paintings. The pine frames, carved with fluted columns, Greek keys, and rosettes, were in place by 1824, and some were gilded by 1826, when the 4 paintings by John Trumbull were installed. The rest were gilded in 1828. The frames were slightly redesigned and regilded in 1905. The most recent conservation project preserved as much of the century-old gildings as possible, repaired damage, and toned the new gilding to match the old. And then there are these historic benches. 14 of the 16 cast iron and wooden benches under the paintings are historic, dating back to 1859. They were designed for use in the hall of the House of Representatives. You just stumble over history every inch of this place. After passing by the entrance to the Speaker of the House's office, we passed into the powerful National Statuary Hall, formerly the Old Hall of the House. The National Statuary Hall collection includes statues provided by each state depicting 2 deceased individuals selected for historic renown or for distinguished civic or military service. Congress passed legislation in 2000 to permit states to replace a statue after 10 years, allowing the collection to reflect more recent honorees. After reading that, I thought, that could be good, that could be bad. This is the room I had always dreamed of seeing. As I have traveled this nation, and as a historian, I have heard about the people who were chosen by states to represent them in Statuary Hall. Although my understanding of Statuary Hall has been expanded after this visit, this room brought me to tears. Some of you might think this is silly, but I hope that some of you understand the impact that these individuals have had on countless numbers of individuals, not only in their home states, but crossing state lines in many cases. They cover not only decades, but centuries of American history in every sort of circumstance. According to this clock, if it's really working and not like the one at Old Epic Grill. We had been on this tour an hour so far. It was flashing by like seconds to me. Junipero Serra, the father of the California missions, was one of the statues I wanted to see the most. Ronald Reagan is the other California statue. When Ronald Reagan took the oath of office as president, he placed his hand on Junipero Serra's Bible. Reagan's statue is in the Rotunda. There's Edison. I've been to his laboratory and factory in New Jersey and his birthplace home in Milan, Ohio. I am privileged to have been to so many of these places that were a part of the lives of these legends. How can I not point out Dr. Marcus Whitman, who was a missionary that crossed the Oregon Trail to reach the Oregon Territory? I've seen the tomahawk that was used to brutally murder him. And there's Rosa Parks. I have stood on the corner in Montgomery, Alabama, where she boarded the bus on that historic day. And I have sat in that very bus at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Of course, the men from Texas and New Hampshire are important to me. Can you get a small understanding of why this meant so much for the workaround to have worked out? I also realized I have some homework to do. There were many people in here that I have never heard of. I'm sure they deserve my attention. These men and women were inventors, authors, military men, patriots, spiritual leaders, and much more. I am so glad that they are honored here in our nation's Capitol building. The tour group was moving on to my great dismay. We had to return our headsets, and we had one more place of amazing intrigue and content to experience in the U.S. Capitol. The exhibition hall behind the plaster, Miss Freedom. I was mentally and physically exhausted, but we still had to see these exhibits and go to the Supreme Court. I will show you some of the most outstanding items that I saw. The desk and pen used by President Lyndon Baines Johnson during the signing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was in attendance. Be sure to watch my Day 1 video when I take you to the exact spot on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial where Dr. King gave his powerful I Have a Dream speech. Of course, the transportation display caught my attention. There's my Smart Trip card. Yellowstone National Park is my second favorite national park, and thanks to sketches and paintings of Thomas Moran, this became America's first national park in 1872. A lot of the items were related to senators and congressmen. Remember just a few minutes ago, I read from the plaque of Samuel F.B. Morse in the first telegraph? This table was used by Abraham Lincoln at his second inauguration. The metal was from leftovers of the recently cast Capitol dome. Well, these people didn't let anything go to waste. I don't blame them. I'm like that too. And this reminds me of the desk we saw on Day 1 at the White House Visitor Center that the architect made from leftover wood when they built the White House. I never left a minute to waste on this adventure. There are gift shops, a cafe, and of course restrooms in the Capitol Visitor Center. And you're not going to believe this, but after being so overwhelmed by the Capitol tour and this exhibition hall, I totally forgot to go into the gift shop. I had already gotten the best gift though. I got on the tour. Next stop, the Supreme Court. No water, no food, no problem today. Tipping our hat to the guard, we passed through security screening into the stark white marble Supreme Court building. The sign says for us to be quiet. I found out why we were supposed to be quiet. There are offices located in the public spaces. Here are the hours for the building, gift shop, and cafe. The smell permeating the halls from the cafe was wonderful. Do you know how hungry I was? That one little Polish dog wore off a long time ago. My tears were drying and I had regained my composure. One of the security guards was my age and grew up in Houston also. Small world. I don't even know how we got on that conversation. The Supreme Court building opened to the public in 1935. This Temple of Justice is both a work of art and a working office building, as I just mentioned. The main hallway is filled with information, memorabilia, and artifacts from the history of the Supreme Court, from its beginning to the most recent years. The U.S. Constitution established 3 branches of government. We've seen the White House, the executive branch, the Capitol, the legislative branch, and now we are standing in the U.S. Supreme Court building, the judicial branch. The displays tell of the justices and cases. Of course, some of the information is positive and some is negative about these black-robed individuals. Most of you have heard of John Jay and the Federalist Papers of 1818. Do you know what Chief Justice he was? Which one? Was he the first, the second, or the third? I'll tell you in a little bit. Actually, I'll tell you right before we walk out the doors. My New Hampshire friends, did you know that the state's motto was challenged in the Supreme Court and the motto was upheld? Live free or die. There are between 70 and 80 cases decided during each term, and 5 or more justices constitute a majority. Ronald Reagan nominated Sandra Day O'Connor, a woman exceedingly successful in law and political positions in Arizona, as the first female associate justice. There are personal items from her 24 years on the land's highest court. Some of the items were really interesting and some were just flat out cool, like this bench chair, the only one known to survive from the Marshall Court. Remember, we were over in the Marshall Court, over in the Capitol building? The courts are referred to by the Supreme Court Chief Justice's name, like the Marshall Court was headed by Chief Justice John Marshall. I've said a few times in this series how ordinary items become extraordinary and become an iconic part of history. Like the yellow ribbon around the old oak tree that we saw at the Collecting Memories Gallery at the Library of Congress in Day 2. Well, it's the same with this chair. It's just a simple chair, and now it's a part of huge history. I read that the black robes have been a centuries-old tradition and worn throughout all levels of courts, indicating impartiality and decorum to legal proceedings, if you were wondering. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was one of the most outspoken and well-known of the associate justices. We have been to her grave at Arlington National Cemetery in a section for judges. I really enjoyed seeing the personal items from the different members of the court. We learned that no paintings of living judges are hung on the hallowed halls of the Supreme Court building. Architect alert, as we were wandering around looking at all the amazing displays, I saw this sign pointing down a side corridor to a spiral staircase for viewing only. Inside the doorway ahead is one of the more interesting aspects of the architecture of the Supreme Court building, a self-supporting elliptical spiral staircase. It is one of the 2 identical staircases designed for the building by Cass Gilbert. It is unclear whether Gilbert chose to use this rare form for practical reasons or simply for its exceptional visual beauty. Maybe both, huh? The marble was quarried in Alabama. Each of the staircases has 136 steps that complete 7 spirals while ascending 5 stories from the basement to the 3rd floor. The cantilever design, that's like from my favorite architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. Anyway, sorry. The cantilever design of the staircases eliminate the need for a central support, as each step is anchored into the marble wall on one end and rests upon the step below it. On each floor's landing, bronze door frames are decorated with neoclassical motifs, including leaves, urns, and floral decorations. Exquisite. I would love to walk up and down those steps, but I certainly understand and appreciate it being close to the general public, don't you? Another New Hampshire note. How many of you, my New Hampshire friends, know of Chief Justice Harlan Fiske Stone from Chesterfield, a classmate of President Calvin Coolidge? Due to having 4 terms as president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt appointed 7 Supreme Court justices, all during Stone's tenure. Be sure to watch my video about Roosevelt's beloved Campobello, the place he grew up enjoying and having the life-changing event of contracting polio and becoming paralyzed there. Uniquely, Stone enjoyed summering in Maine in the Down East Acadia region, not far from FDR's New Brunswick escape. The links to my Down East, Acadia, and Campobello videos are in the description below. One of the main things that you will see, you can't miss it, is the statue of seated Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall. He is honored because he is the nation's longest-serving Chief Justice. He served for 34 years between 1801 and 1835. There were other informational posters about significant Supreme Court cases and related photographs along most of the hallways. We saw this painting, Antonin Scalia, also a Reagan appointee. We have been to the entrance of the ranch where he died in 2016 in a remote region of West Texas. I just had to walk up this staircase. It's inviting, isn't it? It's the way to the actual courtroom and the Great Hall. We found the actual Supreme Court courtroom. I have to admit it was nothing like I imagined. You know, you see pictures, but then when you see something in person, it's like, okay. It was much smaller than I expected. This is where the justices meet to hear oral argument and announce decisions. And here we are. How cool is this? Each year, from the first Monday in October through late June, the justices meet in the courtroom, the Supreme Court's public meeting space. Generally, two types of sittings take place in the courtroom: oral argument and non-argument sessions. Oral argument is a time for attorneys to make a presentation to the court and answer questions posed by the justices. Afterwards, the justices meet in private to discuss the cases, vote, and write opinions. In non-argument sessions, the court meets to announce its decisions and handle administrative matters. The justices sit on the bench in order of seniority. The Chief Justice is always considered the most senior and sits in the center. Among the Associate Justices, seniority is determined by the length of service. The most senior Associate Justice sits to the Chief Justice's right, and each justice then alternating left to right. Groups can go inside the courtroom for a 30-minute lecture every hour on the half hour. We chose to pass on this part. These tours are not held the days that the court is in session. I recommend that you go to the Supreme Court website to find out about sitting in the gallery when the court is in session. I think I'll look into doing that. Opposite the courtroom is the Great Hall, a grand and majestic space, filled with the bust of the former Chief Justices along each side. How many names do you remember or recognize? And now I'm giving you an answer to one of my questions. John Jay was the first Chief Justice. Can you name the current Supreme Court justices? Do you know the name of the Chief Justice? Do you know how many of them are women? It's time to walk out that front door, which exits onto the front plaza. Remember, we saw Paul come out in day 2. Now you can have a view from inside out. It's a shame the striking structure was masked. I wonder what they're doing. And there's the Capitol. It was time to start winding down the day, and we were going to pass on going to the Botanical Garden, but rather choosing to walk around the Capitol grounds and back to the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial in Union Square. The sky was picture-perfect blue, and I wanted to get some great photos for you. And I want to tell you about freedom and the Capitol Dome. It's all very interesting. The Capitol grounds, also known as Capitol Park, was a baseball field in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Capitol is situated on 58.8 acres of pristine land at the east end of the National Mall. Winding paths, memorial trees, and beautiful flowers are part of the plan completed in 1892 by renowned landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, whom I've spoken of often throughout my videos. We passed back by the red brick summer house. Olmsted described the plan as very simple. His objective was to be a dignified park-like setting for the Capitol. Olmsted was big on parks, and you'll want to find out all the parks that he has designed around this nation. I barely caught pictures of the granite lamp piers and bronze fountains. It was by pure accident. The thing that I found interesting about these granite lamp piers, Bay of Fundy granite was used for the massive piers that Olmsted designed to hold bronze gas-burning light fixtures. The Bay of Fundy? We were just at the Bay of Fundy when we went to Campobello Island. The Bay of Fundy. Do you know where the Bay of Fundy is? Do you know what's so interesting about the Bay of Fundy? Do you know why the Bay of Fundy is exciting and interesting and historical? You'll have to watch that video. But that really thrilled me just to see that part. Now, at the back of the Capitol is the Olmsted Terrace. It was constructed in 1884 to 1892 on the northwest and south sides of the Capitol. The marble terrace provided a strong visual platform, correcting the illusion that the massive building was about to slide down the hill. It also added much needed space for storage, shops, and committee rooms. Well, we need to be functional. Here is a photograph from Abraham Lincoln's inauguration where you can see the Capitol Dome was not yet complete. However, the bronze freedom we now see atop the Capitol was placed there on December 2nd, 1863, at Lincoln's insistence, stating this would be an act to help regain cohesiveness of the torn republic. So we need to realize that it was during Lincoln's tenure as president that the Capitol Dome was completed and and that Miss Freedom was placed on the top of the Capitol Dome. It's like everything is interwoven, and as we go from place to place, they all tie in to somewhere else. It's just so fascinating to learn and to understand. I found this great information in the exhibition hall about freedom. It said workers clean and refurbish the Statue of Freedom. The Statue of Freedom needs periodic maintenance, from sharpening the lightning rods in the figure's headdress to checking for failed caulking and weak points in the metal. You might remember that I showed you the lightning rods that had been replaced on the Washington Monument in day 2. They're so small. I was shocked how small they were. They also had this thing about worker tags, and they had some of these tags that they'd found. It said workers restoring the Statue of Freedom in 1993 found dozens of metal tags left by their predecessors long ago, laborers leaving their mark. That's so exciting. The Capitol Dome is the dome situated above the United States Capitol, which reaches upwards to 288 feet in height and 96 feet in diameter. Remember, we were underneath it in the Rotunda, about all those things interweaving. The dome was designed by Thomas U. Walter, the fourth architect of the Capitol, and was constructed between 1855 and 1866 at a cost of, what? $1,047,291? Wait, am I getting that right? Yeah, 6 zeros, 1 million. Wow. The dome is not stone, but cast iron, carefully painted to appear to be made of the same stone as the main Capitol building. I was excited to take these terrific photos of the Grant Memorial. He is in what is called Union Square, an 11-acre public plaza at the foot of Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. It encompasses the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial and the 6-acre Capitol reflecting pool that was constructed in 1971. The Grant Memorial was placed there in 1924. Views differ as to whether the square is just east of the National Mall or is itself the eastern end. We were then on our way, walking a few blocks south to Federal Center Southwest Station to transfer trains at L'Enfant Plaza to catch the Green Line to Branch Avenue to mark this adventure complete. This was a really big day, and they've all been terrific. Be sure to watch the full, epic 4-day DC Adventure Series. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. And please leave me a comment about the things you found to be the most outstanding. Ugly shoes on the ground with broken sunglasses. Unclassic road trip. Oh yeah, Steve felt so bad about breaking my new red National Archives sunglasses that he JB welded them. They won't close and they don't look as awesome, but it's doable. Thanks, Steve. And P.S. I have the number to the visitor center at the National Archives. I might see if I can order a new pair. What do you think?